Greetings. Welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven. Our guest today is Dr. Olumide Ijose. Dr. Ijose primarily teaches international business and strategic management to graduate and undergraduate students, and also has many years of experience as a management consultant. The most exciting part of his position at Governor State University is the opportunity to bring his work experience into the classroom and everyday interaction with students. In his role as division chair, Olu has an opportunity to work with stakeholders in strengthening already attractive programs and has served on a variety of committees at the university and college levels, in the community, and running grants, which enables him to contribute to significant ways to the university's mission of delivering first-rate education to students and to being a catalyst for economic growth in the region. All right, Olu, thanks again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We'll jump right into it. So especially in this time of COVID and just, supply chains and everything are just really kind of got shook up a little bit. What can Sub-Sahara Africa do to become, to disrupt the local supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of potential, but at the same time, they have a lot of work to do. Now, the potential they have resides in the location, right? Sub-Saharan Africa is a lot closer to Europe and America than China, India, Vietnam, or the entire Southeast Asia, in fact, all parts of Asia. So location is a big potential advantage. So the challenge is, how do you turn that location advantage into a reality, right? So a business are always, business are about adding value to their customers, and part of the value they add is a cost factor. And if you can make a company an input a lot closer, to where you're going to do the final assembly, or you're going to sell the product, it can bring the cost down under certain conditions. If the labor cost, that location is lower than labor cost in your location, where you are. If transportation is not prohibitive, right? And if, the employees, the workers in that other country are productive and they're reliable and can get you, the product they're looking for, the service they're looking for, right, almost on a just-on-time basis, then you have a winning possibility in your hands as a business. So Africa has the location advantage, but they have all the other disadvantages. So work needs to be done if they're serious in that continent. Work needs to be done, right, to create, right, the environment that will make an American company want to go to Africa and say, I'm going to set up a plant here. We set up like a federal assembly location over here, right? I'm going to start to manufacture some components over here. Or I'm going to buy, from your businesses, right? That confidence is lacking, right? Because the infrastructure is not in place, right? And the skills is also not in place. Now, if you go to Africa, right, the population there is very young, right? They now have about, I'll say 50 years ago, the population of Africa was, the entire African continent, the population was about 600 million people. Today, it's a little over 1 billion people. It's a young population. The demography skews young. 70% of the population is less than 30 years old. So you have a lot of young people there, right? And who's going to do the work if not young people, right? Part of what, a country like Japan and China and the America too, we're coming up really close to Japan, is we have an older population. So you have an older population, that demography, right? It doesn't really work very well because after time, your productivity will start to go down because older people can work as long as a younger person can. So they have those two big advantages: location, the proximity to Europe and North America, and a young population.
Well, and kind of speaking to that with the younger population, and that massive shift in population growth, there's got to be an opportunity for that group of people to need more work, or need an industry, or some sort of skill base to grow into, versus kind of like I said, an older population that is on the kind of declining into that workforce.
Exactly. Right. But at the end of the day, a person have skills. If you're a machinist, you got to know how to work as a machinist, right? If you're gonna program, you got to know how to use the programming language. So the fact that you're young is just a potential. You need to have skills, and what is lacking is those skills. So the question is, why Africans, what do they possess the skills that's required to turn Africa into a global supply chain powerhouse? And that goes back to governance. It goes back to the institutions, right? The governance quality in most African countries is very poor, right? The guy who's the president, or who is in the Senate, or who's in the House, or who's the governor, right? They're not the best material to be in those positions. Now, there's long history behind that. I don't think we want to get into that. But the point is, unless you have a good government that's going to create an environment that is going to understand that you need to invest in people, in the education, in the healthcare, right? You're going to struggle, right? And that's what's happening in Africa right now, where the governments are not making the right investments, right, in the people to give them the skills that they need. So if you go back to China, right? China did not just happen all of a sudden. China took decades, right, to come to the China that we know today, that is the manufacturing powerhouse of the entire globe. You got to go back to Mao's revolution, and the decision that they took in China to invest in the people. So that they invested a lot in the people, in the skills of the people. And 20, 30, 40 years of investment, all of a sudden, right, they broke out. It's like, where they come from? Well, you know what? It's investment in people. You got to give them the skills, right, to be able to, right, be, a supplier, right, of what industry wants. Because part of what's going on is this, right? The demand that we have in America for goods and services, it's at a global scale. So let's take shoes, for instance, right? For it's got a pair of shoes, right, in America at a price that Americans would buy the shoes, right? And that price has to include the manufacturing price, the transportation price, right? The tariffs that you have to pay, everything, right? You have to create them in huge volumes. You have a factory that can manufacture millions of shoes, and that drops the price of each shoe, right? Because of the fixed costs and all of that being spread around. So, for Africa to get to that point, they need to also be able to manufacture at a global scale, at huge, massive scales. And that requires a lot of people to have skills, not just one person or two or three. You need thousands of people with skills. You need a lot of engineers, right? So that's the challenge, right? Putting that human capital, right, in place.
And you're speaking to infrastructure and kind of example that you've given of China didn't just grow overnight. It was a conscious decision to invest and build to the capacity that it's at today. And we had a gentleman on one of our earlier interviews speaking to that point, from talking about the trade and how it's not so easy just to take all that manufacturing jobs in China and pull them out, because of a lot of the policies and the subsidies that China does for its factories, for example, to really enable them to offer that manufacturing price per unit, per product, however they tabulate that. They're doing that with a massive amount of support from the government to keep that price point there, to keep that manufacturing there. Certainly that sounds like that would have to be something along the lines, similar, to Africa is you'd have to have that buy-in to enable that.
Right, China is more of a government-led process, right? So it's the government, right, that is like providing the subsidies, right? The advantage that Africa has is that the labor costs in Africa are even much lower than labor costs in China, right? They're extremely, extremely, extremely low. I mean, if you give a guy $300 a month, right? The guy's like, what are we going to do with all this money? So the labor cost is very, very low. So the need to subsidize production, right? To get the cost down will not be as necessary as it is in China of today, because costs in China, they've really gone up, right? And so and the government has put like a floor below that, because the government understands that exports is the backbone of the Chinese economy. Even though they're trying, to transition into a more consumer-driven economy like America, right? Exports is still the backbone of the economy. So you're right. You're right. In the model, if you're going to model this, you're going to look at all of that. How much subsidy are you going to require? Right? How much land? Because if you're going to do a lot of supply chain, right, and get the volume that you need land, you need water. And that's part of why China is succeeding. It's a huge continent. It's got the land, it's got the rivers, right? So even if you go back to America and look at American history, American manufacturing history, right? It was centered in places like in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, in the areas that are close to water. You need water, you need land, you need people with skills, right? And if you have all that, right, and you have a stable government, and you can demonstrate to investors that your risk profile, right, is not as high as we know it to be. I'm talking about Africa. I'm convinced that Americans and Europeans will invest in that continent, right? But the Africans themselves have to create the conditions, right, to attract that investment.
Yeah, and you had mentioned this, I think briefly, but kind of going back to developing that skill set and that skilled workforce. Is that something that could be considered an advantage at this point? A U.S. company or European company could come in, and it would take the time to develop that population, but they could certainly set up the development process, the education process for the skills that they are looking for, and really target, that growth.
No, that has to be organic. That has to be done by Africans themselves, right? They have to, look at, the areas that have comparative advantage. And okay, I got a lot of cocoa, I got a lot of oil, I got a lot of whatever the commodity is, right? And what exactly is required to add value to this commodity, right? And what kind of skills is required to make that happen, and invest in the skills. The Germans and the Japanese, those two countries, right? I know for a fact, like about 5-7 years ago, they approached some African countries and offered to help them, develop, those human capital skills. And I'm not talking about now we're talking about, a skilled worker, a skilled carpenter, a skilled lathe machine worker. That's what we're talking about here. Those type of skills that you require in manufacturing, right? But, governments that are inept, that can't see the future, right? That are content with what they have, they didn't take advantage of it, So, I would not expect, if you go to the typical African country today, like take Nigeria, for instance, or Kenya, or Ghana, you're going to find a Cadbury. Cadbury makes chocolates. They've been making chocolates there forever. You're going to find a Procter & Gamble, American Procter & Gamble. They make soaps in there. They're making soaps there forever, right? But they make them in small factories, right? In small volumes, right? So it's essentially a footprint. Let's have a stake in here, right? If things get well, then we understand the country, right? We can, we can really invest and grow really, really quickly. But you got to give capital confidence. Capital has to believe that you're well governed, right? You're a democracy, you have elections, the elections are not rigged, they're not rigging in elections, right? That it's free, it's fair, and that that change of power, when there's a need to change power, it's not violent. There's nobody going to cut and say, you know what, there's, you stole my election and all of that, which is what happens in Africa all the time. And capital is watching all the time. The people in America, people in Europe, people in Japan, they're watching all the time. They're getting all this data, right? Because until you prove yourself that you are stable, right, you're well governed, and that your institutions are getting more matured and reliable, they're not going to show up. They're going to keep manufacturing in China, right, in Mexico, in Vietnam, in India. That's where the supply chain of the world is going to be. Because the truth of the matter is, America, Western Europe, they've gotten so expensive in terms of their labor costs that even when you apply technology to bring the cost of production down, it's still, the final product is too high. You still need to bring in, inputs, right, and components from lower priced countries, right, so they're just watching, right, if you don't prove yourself that, you can be a reliable business partner, right, have reliable political system, have reliable institutions. If you can prove yourself that if there's, if I start a contract with you and I have to go to the court system, and the courts are going to be fair and impartial, right, you cannot tell me I can come and buy land and own the land and build a factory, right? If you don't have those working institutions, I'm not going to go. I'm just going to keep going to China and India and Vietnam and Malaysia and Mexico, and that's what I'm going to do. Even though I know that, you're close, I know you have the people and the young and the enterprising, right? But, that's not as important as the certainty, because it's my money. It's my capital. I got to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are fantastic points. Are there any other potential advantages to having Western Europe, U.S., Canada shifting their global supply chains to Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, another advantage that that I think is that Africans are in terms of it culturally, right? The way they think, right, and the kind of affinity they have to other parts of the world, right? They're closer to Western Europe and America than to China. China is trying to make an inroad into Africa. They try to go to Africa buy commodities, buy copper, buy cobalt and all kind of minerals that the world cannot do without, right? And China is doing it in a way that might not be so good. But what they're doing is offering those countries loans, cheap loans, right? And in exchange for those cheap loans, they're building football stadiums, right? They're building railways to nowhere. They're building roads to nowhere. They're not, but those countries are getting, they're getting indebted to China, right? But China is giving them assets that are not going to help them pay the debt back. So they're going to be on the hook to China, and China can keep mining those commodities forever. So if America and Western Europe are really concerned about China's influence in the globe, which I know they are, and if they're actually watching what China is doing in Africa, which I know they are, it's a threat, right? To Western Europe, China is a threat, right? To America, its activities in Africa, right? So I think it's strategically important, not even because of national security, right? For Western Europe and America to counter China, what's trying to do in Africa, and the only way you can counter that is by going in there and replacing Chinese investments with their investments, right? So, but it's quite complicated because you also have to understand that, without Africa, right, the global economy will struggle because a lot of the minerals and the strategic metals that drives global economy, right, that goes into your computer, right, goes into your car, goes into electric battery, like, a lot of those minerals and metals are in Africa, right, and due to colonial history, right, a lot of those, those deposits are still under the control of the British and the French, right, just based on that colonial history they have in Africa. But China is making inroads. When there are new finds, those new finds are more being controlled by China than by Western Europe, right? So you got to ask yourself a question, and there are three questions. Who do I want to be produced in Africa? The Chinese, the Africans, or the Americans and the Europeans? Who should control, right, the wealth of Africa? And if you ask me, I think the wealth of Africa should be controlled by Africa, America, and Europe. That's because I think, there's more fairness, right, from Americans and Europeans than there is from the Chinese. Not just me, but that's my perspective. I'm other people who see things the other way around, right? But that question has to be answered, right? If Nigeria, for instance, right, or Congo, Zaire, right, Congo Kinshasa, right, where you have a lot of deposits, if those countries start to add value to the commodities, right, that means that, the old game of taking those commodities to Europe to add value to it and then bring it to America, that's going to be disrupted, right? And there's going to be every time you have a disruption, there's going to be a loser. And there's also going to be a winner, right? If you look at it, just from a very normative perspective, you might think the loser will be the European company who took the raw materials before, added value to it, and then sold it to the big manufacturers, right? People making silicon chips and cars and batteries and all of it. But I don't think so. I think if you add the value in Africa, right, you're going to then the Africans themselves are going to get more money. They're going to have a high disposable income. What are they going to use the money for? Buy stuff from Europe, buy stuff from America, right? So if Africans get richer, right, they're going to demand more. And right now, there's such a huge deficit of things we take for granted in America. Washing machines, dishwashers, televisions, electronics. Such a huge demand. We don't have the money, to buy it. If you go and create if those factories can come up in Africa, people have the money, then they can buy more, higher value things, right? That will keep the American economy and European economy humming along for another who knows how long. That's the way I look at it.
Well, and one aspect that I didn't even think of until you kind of brought it up was, kind of the model right now of taking resources out of Africa, shipping them off to have the value added refining, use them in the manufacturing, and then ship them again to, wherever they're being sold or, dispersed out of, being able to keep all of that piece in Africa. So the materials are coming from there, the refining is coming from there, the actual manufacturing is coming from there. One of the things that might do, especially as the world looks that way, is limit the needed or limit the amount of unneeded or unnecessary or extra transportation costs and all the kind of sustainability issues that arise with that. So kind of to your point of being another case for trying to keep everything local in Africa, that's certainly a consideration that I hadn't considered until our conversation.
But I wouldn't say keep everything local in Africa, right? But if you look at the value chain, right, making a product, keep as much of it local, right? Because the truth of the matter is this, right? America and Western Europe, right? After 1945, after the Second World War, right? Where they were dominant, right? Workers made a lot of money, right? You can't tell a worker, right, who was making like 40, 50, $60 an hour that all of a sudden I'm going to pay you China wage. I'm going to start paying you $5, $10 an hour. It's not going to work, right? So American entrepreneur and American innovation, they have to think of solutions that can transcend, right? The basic cost of production here. So what I'm trying to say is this, right? There's no way, we talk about reshoring in America and bringing manufacturing back, right? That's been big, like trying to reshore. Some of it has come back. Some has been near-shored to Mexico. That's still near enough, right? To America, right? But the fact is, America and Western Europe are always going to be reliant on global supply chains. They've got to the point of their economic development, right, and to the point of, of just basic, way of life, right, of people, that you cannot drop wages and salaries low enough, right, to bring all those manufacturing back to America and back to Western Europe. So there just has to be a balance. So the question is, should that global supply chain stay in Asia, or should a part of it go to Africa, where you have all these location advantages, and you have, a younger population, you also have the raw materials right there, right, in Africa. So it's not taking everything back to Africa. It's taking some parts of it back to Africa because, right, the West European economy, the Japanese economy, right, and the American economy, the Canadian economy, the Australian economy, the economies of advanced countries, the costs are so high, right, they have to buy components from other parts of the world, right, So another reason why Africans, people that study the political economy of Africa don't trust China, right, to play fair with Africa is, China is an advanced economy, right, but it's also classified as a developing economy because it still has millions of people that are poor, and China is trying to bring them out of poverty, right, So why would China support global value chains in Africa when it needs those raw materials to go to China to be processed in China, create jobs for Chinese, and send, the finished components, right, to America or to Japan or wherever, or even to do the final assembly in China? China needs the jobs too, right? I'm not saying America doesn't need the jobs. I'm not saying Europeans don't need the jobs, but not as much as China does, because the number of poor people, right, in America, it's a fraction of the number of poor people that China has to lift out of poverty. China is a 1.2 billion country. The last number I saw, almost 400 million people in China were still very, very poor. I mean, very, very poor, right? So it's a game, right? It's a game that is being played. But I just think that just the potential of Africa, right? I think it should be considered. But to go back to where we started, the responsibility is on Africa. Africa has to govern itself better. Those countries in Africa, they got to govern themselves better than they've ever done before. They have to put the right people in place. Can you imagine, how America will have developed if you didn't have the best people? I'm going back to George Washington, going back to the founding fathers. You have the best people as a president of America, the best people as governors, as senators, as representatives in all, making those governance decisions. America will struggle, right? Any country will struggle. You need to have your best people, right, in charge of your politics and making those governance decisions. Otherwise, you're going to keep struggling. And that's the root cause where Africa struggles.
Well, Olu, thanks again for that enlightening conversation. That's a whole area that I am not familiar with, and I look forward to more and learning more about just the intricacies of of having to kind of how do you create Africa as a more, a more competitive player and more attractive player in the global supply chain market?
Thank you, Ryan. I was happy to share with you, and yeah, let's do this again. Just call me anytime, and I'm ready. We can get it done. We'll talk some more.
That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. For future suggestions of topics or comments, please drop us a line at cyber@indiana.edu.